Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. The views and opinions you are about to hear are the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of anyone else. Now on to the podcast.
Welcome back to the PFC Podcast. This is Dennis, and this episode was recorded with the sponsorship and support of the Special Operations Medical Association. Thank you guys very much, and I hope you enjoyed the talk.
So good morning, everybody. I really appreciate you coming to our track here. We put a lot of work into it. Mark has done an amazing job just organizing us as speakers, as presenters, as track leaders, and I really do appreciate everything you've done here, Mark, for everybody here. These are going to be my own opinions. I'm going to share some things that maybe it'll rub you the wrong way, maybe not, maybe it'll open up your mind. I'm just going to tell you things from my perspective, the way that I've seen things over 20 years, and hopefully that can open some minds here. So my disclosures, I do have quite a few disclosures. So I work full-time for a training company, and I'm going to be talking about training. If that puts you off, the door's back there, that's fine. I'm also here on the board of directors for the Special Operations Medical Association. So again, thank you for coming to Raleigh, despite all the fiscal and political difficulties that we've had. And then I also work with Dennis and Sean with the Prolonged Field Care Collective, as Jamie alluded to. So with all those disclosures, here's where I found myself after, so many years of service to the United States military. I'm able to do what I love, get paid for it. I like to think that I'm good at it, and I do feel there's a need because I've seen the demand signal for it. So a couple of years back when we started talking about irregular warfare and medical support, one of the first documents that everybody should be looking at is the resistance operating concept. When you start looking into that document and you do a control F for medic or medicine, there's not a whole lot in there. There's a little bit. It's not completely devoid, but there's much to be desired in that document. And I think we all realize that right up front. And so somebody suggested, why don't we write a medical annex? I don't know if that was Reagan Lyon. Reagan, if you're out here. Nobody really wanted to take that on, because if you think about it, that is a huge undertaking. But there were a couple people in the room at the time thought it was very important for us to take the resistance operating concept and then just add a medical annex to that. So we've been actively trying to figure out what that's going to look like. And then Adam Kendrick has been instrumental in helping me figure out how to organize this, because it's a huge lift. And I think now that we have the bones and even some of the flesh put onto this thing, we have a table of contents and everything. We actually have some need for other authors from around the world to get involved in this thing and actually add some of the expertise, because it's not just going to be one or two people sitting in their basement, and as I say, creating this manual that's going to be useful for people around the world. So some of you up here, some of the speakers, I'll probably be reaching out to you. If you have any interest, come find me. Or Dennis or somebody else may can direct you towards me, and I can figure out how to get you in there. So if you look at that table of contents, I think we're up to 24 chapters at this point, and just as it sits right now, it's about 110 pages. What we'll probably do is continue to expand it, and then we'll go down with a scalpel and we'll start cutting it down and making it as relevant as we possibly can. But I'd love for the subject matter experts in some of these areas of expertise to get on there and actually own a chapter or even just a subsection, and you get in there, share what you've learned, just like Dr. Howes is up here, get in there, talk about the surgery section, and I think it would be a really valuable tool going forward. Just like the resistance operating concept is on Amazon, it's open for free download. That's our plan here with this manual as well. So if that piques your interest, come find me later. Now, getting into what I'm going to talk about here today, just a quick background of my understanding of everything. I gave parts of this talk last year at ATMC. I was fortunate enough for SOMSA to send me down there and be there with Stu and all the rest of the guys. And so if it looks familiar, if some of you were there, you get to see a couple of the slides over again. But I'm going to shift the focus from the big strategic picture that I was looking at last time to a more specific focus on the non-medics. So the total and unrestricted warfare of the first half of the 20th century required entire societies to rise up and defend themselves. And now you're seeing with the proliferation of nuclear weapons, the irregular warfare is not going away. We talk about these books often, Gorilla Surgeon, The Black Scalpel, as was just mentioned in the book club that was up here. All those exploits and amazing feats of heroism that are in those books kind of go to show that we did not do a very good job deterring those conflicts, and then people had to come in later and through extraordinary effort and great sacrifice to themselves and the societies actually go and do something after the fact. But I would suggest that being more proactive in deterrence would be a better strategy going forward than giant wars of the past. So if you look at some of these books, the reason why I have this up here is because there is the past 10 years or so, there's been a renewed interest in smaller teams moving forward to work with the partner forces within the U.S. military. So we do have Jedburghs here in the United States, in USSF, and it is not the exact same thing as we look back into history and you read his books about the Jedburghs and the OGs, but there are some overlaps. And as we go forward, if you guys don't know Prairie Fire, we can look up Prairie Fire on Instagram. This is an art company run by an X-18 Delta there in Aberdeen, Southern Pines. So he makes some amazing art. This is just one of the pictures there that really piqued my interest. And you're going to hear Lars talk about Balder in just a little bit. But one of the scenes that I found myself in at Balder was sitting there with our partners from around the world, talking about plans and strategies. But what's different from this picture to this one right here is that these were our allies that were leading the effort. And that was really inspiring when you're working with people who care, they're competent, and they get things done. So sitting in there, I was just inspired there, sitting with Lars, sitting with Paul, sitting with Panda, and everybody else that was in that picture. It was a really good feeling to have those allies and partners not just taking commands from the U.S., but showing us what works in their country and what works for their military. So in preparing for traditional warfare, a lot of stuff is done on the down low. It's secret. You don't want the enemy to know. There's a little bit that's done overtly. Maybe you do some joint training exercises, some, talisman saber, the Trojan footprint, all the other things that have come up before. But a lot of the stuff is done out of sight of the adversary. And what I would suggest is, in order to defer, I see it now, Mark, thank you. Mark, throwing a little Easter egg for you. In order to deter that aggression and you have a comprehensive defense, some of the things that you're planning and doing have to be known to the enemy. So they have to happen above the surface. They have to know that we have a strong alliance. They have to know that we have efforts and initiatives that are undergoing and underway. And there's still going to be other stuff that happens in secret. But here in this room, we're going to be talking about some of the stuff that happens more overtly. There's a lot of talk of large-scale combat operations, and whether you believe that's the next way forward as far as warfare, or you believe that it's going to be irregular warfare, there's a lot of overlap in the planning and preparation for the two. And so what you can do, whether you subscribe to one or the other, is just realize we don't know what the next conflict is going to look like. Despite all the books and movies and papers that come out, nobody knows what it's going to look like. In order to be prepared for that, you have to kind of prepare for everything. And I'm going to talk about some of that stuff, how we do it with their ground up, the guys who are going to be going forward and doing some of these things. So in my previous years, we've talked about the IW Med stakeholders, and it's pretty much everybody, right? When you talk about comprehensive defense, integrated deterrence, we talk about whole society approaches. We're going to look at your allied expeditionary forces, your host nation, civilian infrastructure, your partner force, your NGOs, and your volunteers. We have representatives from each one of these groups here today, and I'm going to specifically talk about our allied expeditionary capability. So for us, U.S. military, going forward, how can you best prepare not just where you're going, but how do you prepare yourself for an unknown or uncertain environment? So we're going to be talking about the very top tier, the bottom, the top, however you want to look at it, the guys who don't have as much training. And I think the first time I ever taught a CLS course was the old yellow books that we had back in the day. And most of it was, it really wasn't a bad course. It just wasn't you didn't have the evidence-based combat medicine that was in there like you do today. What you did have back then was all the field sanitation and everything else that was in there, which was great to teach the non-medics. But at the time, we were going into the GWAT, we were going into Iraq and Afghanistan on big FOBs that were, well cared for, and you didn't have the same amount of sickness and everything that we would potentially have to deal with later. So what I would suggest is Tier 2 CLS is not enough for SF, but is absolutely essential for SF. So I cannot speak to, MARSOC or some of our other sister services, even though I have trained with them. We have a training exercise going on right now in Eastern North Carolina where you have the team moving through a guerrilla hospital, a whole network, a trench system. They're working with auxiliaries and undergrounds, and that's great, but I'm going to talk specifically about USSF for this discussion right here. So in the U.S. Special Forces, we have the Sephardic course, and it's an 8-week course. If you talk to some of the guys, they have to shoot in. It's mostly a CQB type course, and it's a very important course, but not everybody on the team gets to do that. There's usually one or two on an ODA that gets to do that, and then most of those graduates end up going to a different company. Meanwhile, the rest of the guys on the ODA, they end up going to the Cephalic course. It's a shorter course, usually taught by just Sephardic grads, and then they come in, they teach the knowledge that they gain from the Sephardic course and their experiences doing CQB and urban combat, and they pass that on to the rest of the team. And it's a 4-week, usually, I've seen shorter and longer, but usually it's a 4-week course, and it's there. You start on flat ranges, you go learn how to work in the house, you do some CQB, and you do a final full mission profile at the end. I would say that is a better way to look at medical training, and it might be an easier way to communicate that need to unit commanders. You have your specialists with a lot of training, but everybody else needs to be competent or they're going to be a liability when they get into that house. You just take a new guy and throw him into CQB, that could absolutely be a danger and a liability to everybody on that team. And it's not much different in medicine. So what's the actual requirement? That's a great question. If you talk to different TSOCs, it changes depending on where we go around in the world. It could be that you have small teams going without a medic somewhere, as that does happen. And through all those, you have gaps, you have needs, but then you have actual hard requirements. And I have not seen a whole lot of those hard requirements bubble up to produce the resources that you need to get some of that training done. So when you look at some of the capability gaps, these are older because I'm not supposed to share all the new ones. I think we've been getting after these capability gaps with the solutions for at least, almost going on 10 years now, training the non-medics specifically in this type of operations, prolonged field care, irregular warfare. When we started looking at prolonged field care, we put 18 deltas and talk about prolonged field care. In the back of our mind from the get-go, we were thinking about another environment that is more difficult than just going to Africa and doing medicine for a long amount of time. So there are several courses out there. We teach a couple of them at our current company through contracts and other ways. We'll get through some of those in just a moment. I don't know, Noel, are you in here? No, he's not. Okay, so this is Noel's team. He had an interesting event happen to him and his team, taking care of a patient for 7 or 8 hours. Evac was hard. Great AAR if you ever get a chance to talk to Noel's sons about this. But one of the main ways that our non-medics can help the medics is by actually assisting them. If you look at that AAR, the non-medics were not very helpful to Noel in that whole situation. They said, hey, what can you do? And Noel's response to him was, hey, can you get me a cup of coffee because I'm tired? Non-medics can do much more than get you a cup of coffee. We have seen it time and time again. They can take vital signs. They can trend those vital signs. They can alert you to changes in the patient. At some point, if you're a lone medic, you're going to need some assistance from somebody else. If there's more than one patient, now you're going to have non-medics taking care of those other patients that you can't be on. And what we've seen works really well when you put patients or put medics in charge of non-medics, they can actually stand back. They can take in a wider portion of that situation, the scene, and they can direct some of those non-medics had they been properly trained. So it actually is a huge force multiplier. Sometimes as you've seen, what was it, yesterday morning with Mike Dillanair, sometimes you have to help treat the medic because the medic might be the patient. And we've seen that again and again. where you just say you have 2 medics per team, and then you deploy and you actually have 1 medic. This other guy's out of school, but the team sergeant used to be a medic, even though he's not really current. And now you get into the theater and the TSOC asks you, hey, can you guys do split team operations? Because it's doctrinally what you're supposed to be doing. Right here, you have Justin Lasik here, stepped on a landmine back in 2019. The enemy gets a vote. Look at Justin Lasik's Instagram. He's got a bunch of good stuff on there, but one of the quotes from him at the very bottom, he said, as my best friends and teammates treated me, I gave them medical instructions to help their care. So if you listen to that whole AAR on that Hazard Ground podcast, you can listen to about a 2.5 hour AAR talking about how he prepared his team and how his team ended up treating him as the actual casualty while they were on split team ops and the other medic was further away. Again, by doctrine, USSF teams are supposed to be able to split down into much smaller elements. And in this portion right here from FM 3-05.20 says that you should be able to split into 2 6-man teams. I've definitely seen where they split them down more than that. And at that point, even if you had 2 medics, now you have elements without a medic. And that is actually from the Horse Soldiers. Those are some of the original Horse Soldiers. If you even just go and watch that movie and you read some of the accounts, read the books, those guys were geographically separated by a long ways, and they're on horse. So it's not like back in 2001 when they were doing some of this stuff, they could just call the medevac had they needed it. They're going to be treating each other, and if it were the medic that were injured, or if you're on a small 2-man element that didn't have a medic, now you're providing that medical care until later on. So one of the programs that we had in the Office of Special Warfare is now the GX, is we had a whole program, and we still maintain it to this date, where we're training non-medics into an 8-week course, teaching them some EMTB, so they get their EMT basic as a baseline amount of medical knowledge and expertise before we move them into clinical care. We taught about prolonged field care, and then we put them into a 24 to 36 hour FTX. And these are all non-medics. There's a policy letter. Things change by the week, by the year. So this may not be a thing in a week or a year, but it's been going since I got there in 2018. It was going since probably 2016 prior to me getting there. To date, we've probably taught almost close to 1,000 non-medics, which is great. This sounds like a huge number, but over the course of almost 10 years, that's not such a huge number when USSOCOM is 70,000 people. So there's a huge potential to teach a lot more of these guys. We did a crosswalk when we first started out and just threw in our soft AMT right there in the middle. And where does that fit as far as the TCCC tiers? So it's not quite a medic, and we make sure that they understand they're not medics when they go through our course. Every once in a while, they still get a little sporty and they end up trying to do a whole bunch of medicine as opposed to facilitating or enabling the medicine, which is fine. That's up to them and their battalion surgeon and the TSOC surgeon. And we want to just give them the skills that might be required later on. So that crosswalk is always, we're trying to update it, teach them as much as we can in those 8 weeks, but 4 weeks online and 4 weeks in person, there's absolutely a limit as to what you can teach guys. But we have some phenomenal instructors teaching that course right there. So we call that the Soft Austere MedTech, EMT. And that may go away. It may be called something else, but what we've seen is there's huge dividend on that investment when you're teaching those non-medics. We've since added some things, so now we're doing more NAEMT stuff. So we give them pre-hospital trauma life support, advanced medical life support, on top of TCCC Tier 3. So they get all that, and then they grow into prolonged field care. They do their clin med. They learn how to write SOAP notes, and it's actually, when you think about it, and if you had never seen it, you might be a detractor as I was, and then you go, what can you possibly teach guys in 4 weeks? When you have the right instructors in the room with soft guys that have been selected with the right mindset, you can teach them a whole lot, and they soak it up like a sponge. As long as you establish that trust right up front, they're very willing to listen and learn. So again, what about sustainment? I knew somebody was going to ask it, so I just threw the slide up here. Right now in our EMT, just like everybody else who's in EMT, every 2 years. So our guys, they go through, they get their EMT, and then we start working on all the other things that I just listed. From that, they have all those where you call them CEUs, that are ready to go for their EMT. So they're already ready to recertify in the next 2 years. So it's a 4-year course for just going for those 4 weeks. The battalion surgeons can also sustain their SOFAMs when they get to the group. Some groups use them more than others, and it may be because of comfortability, knowledge of the program, or also where they're going. Some places you go and there's first world hospitals, they're TRICARE approved. Great. You probably don't need those guys to be doing austere amputations or something in their hotel rooms, or make sure that they understand that as well. Not everyone can go because of the time commitment and because of the commitment in actual funds to get it going, because you get that amount of instructors with the instructor to student ratio that we have, and it actually gets quite expensive pretty quickly. It's rarely sustained by the individual, and personalities and groups don't always have buy-in. If they can't make it to that course, we do have a 4-day course. It started as a 4-3, so 4th Battalion, 3rd Special Forces group exercise called Mountain Path, and we've maintained and sustained that, and that's what we teach even to this day, where we're doing whole team training. We split everybody up into 2 groups. So you have one group doing all the non-medic instruction. They're learning how to take vitals. They're refreshing their TCCC. And the medics are learning some of the higher stuff, and they're getting sustained on their ultrasound. But really, we're teaching the medics how to integrate with their whole team and how to direct them and be more effective with their teams. So that is what I have for my presentation. We'll take questions afterwards. Hold on real quick there. Real quick. All right, so wait, there's more. So as we look to AI, there's some opportunities for us to leverage some of that stuff. So for this group in particular, I just wanted to show you something I've been working on, talked to a couple of people. There's a custom chat GPT that we made just for medical support to irregular warfare. So if you haven't seen this before, you can go on there. It's an open access thing. I paid for it myself, but kind of training that thing just by feeding it books, the stuff the book club guys had, these USASOC air studies, and it actually is pretty useful. And so if you can imagine, if you asked it that question right there, provide some advice to a young medical provider thinking about getting more involved with the village medical response team in Burma. That was one that I just came up with a couple weeks ago just to ask it, and it starts giving us a great response. But hey, why don't you put it into Burmese so it's the guys that are there? So it can actually look at that and give you all those answers in all the languages that you can imagine, and it's already trained to do so. So this would be like an online, offline medical support system. So if you're interested, click the thing, ask it some questions. Let me know how it worked for you. And
that's it for today's podcast. Make sure to go to our website, www.prolongedfieldcare.org. Check out our free downloads and a ton of other helpful information. Grab a bag of our fresh roasted PFC coffee, links in the description below, and stay on the bleeding edge of combat and austere medicine. This is Dennis for the PFC Podcast, out.